They found his boots by the river, laces still tied, as if he'd walked straight out of his own skin. But it was the journal, buried beneath the floorboards, that held the real terror. The morning Samuel Cord disappeared, the sky had been the color of a bruise. Eliza remembered that. She remembered the purple-gray dawn pressing against the cabin window, the way the wind came down off the mesa with a sound like breathing. She remembered standing at the stove, her belly round and tight beneath her apron, stirring cornmeal mush that stuck to the wooden spoon. Samuel had kissed her forehead, dry lips, quick, and said he was riding to check the fence line near Crow Creek. That was 6 days ago. Now she stood in the doorway of their cabin, one hand pressed to the small of her back, the other shading her eyes against the white-hot sun. The valley stretched before her, all dust and scrubbed grass and stone, empty as a held breath. No horse, no man, no answers. The marshal had come yesterday with 3 riders. They'd found Samuel's roan mare, wandering near the river, reins dragging. They'd found his boots on the bank, set side by side, like he'd stepped out of them careful-like, laces still tied, his hat floating in the shallows. But no body, no blood, no Samuel. Marshal Godfrey had stood in her cabin with his thumbs hooked in his belt, looking at her the way men look at a thing they don't trust. "A man don't just vanish, Mrs. Cord," he'd said, voice flat. "He runs off, or he's run off by someone. Either way, there's always a reason." She'd felt the weight of his stare on her pregnant belly, felt the implication hanging in the air like smoke. "Samuel wouldn't run," she'd whispered. The marshal had only tipped his hat and left her standing there, alone with the baby kicking against her ribs, and the terrible silence of unanswered questions. Now, as the sun began its slow fall toward the western rim, Eliza moved through the cabin with aching feet and a mind that wouldn't settle. She lit the oil lamp, fed the stove, avoided looking at Samuel's empty chair, his coat still hanging on the peg by the door. The baby shifted inside her, a rolling press of limb against her side. She was 8 months along, heavy with child and grief both. Her hands shook as she poured water from the pitcher, splashing it against the basin's edge. That's when she heard it. The creak. A soft groan of wood from beneath her feet, near the corner where the iron bed frame met the floor. She'd heard it before, Samuel walking heavy after a long day's work. But this time it sounded different. Hollow. Wrong. Eliza knelt slow, her belly making it awkward. She pressed her palm flat against the planks. One shifted slightly under her weight. She'd never noticed that before. Her fingers found the edge, pried gently. The board lifted with a whisper of dust and darkness. Underneath, wrapped in oilcloth, was a leather-bound journal. Samuel's handwriting on the Lausos first page, but the words, God, the words, made her blood run cold. "They're watching the house. If you're reading this, I'm already gone." The journal named 3 men, all pillars of the town, and by sunrise, those same men were at her door, with rope and righteousness. Eliza read by lamplight until her eyes burned and the wick guttered low. Samuel's journal was madness and truth, tangled together like barbed wire. Page after page of names, dates, transactions written in his careful hand. The Blackwood Mining Company. Water rights stolen through forged deeds. Families driven off their land. And 3 men orchestrating it all. Mayor Hutchins, Land Agent Farrow, and Judge Brennan. Samuel had discovered it 6 months back, stumbled onto papers in the land office while filing their own claim. He'd been gathering proof, quietly, carefully, planning to take it to the territorial governor. The last entry was dated the morning he vanished. They know. Saw Pharaoh watching from the ridge yesterday. If anything happens to me, Eliza, run. Take this journal and run. They'll come for you next. They'll call you witch, liar, conspirator, anything to bury the truth with my body. I'm sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry. Her hands trembled, smudging ink with sweat and tears. She should run. She knew that. But her belly was too heavy, the baby too close. And where would she go in the dark with nothing but a horse and a dead man's accusations? She wrapped the journal back in oilcloth, placed it beneath the floorboard, and lay down on the bed still wearing her boots. Sleep came fitful, full of shadows and whispers. When the pounding started before dawn, Eliza jerked awake, heart hammering, fists against wood, voices, men's voices, rough and certain. "Eliza Cord, open this door!" She stumbled upright, her body heavy and clumsy. Through the window she saw torches, 6 men on horseback, Marshal Godfrey at the front, Mayor Hutchins beside him, face hard as creekstone. She opened the door a crack. "What? You're under arrest," Godfrey said, and the words came out flat, rehearsed. "For the murder of your husband, Samuel Cord." The world tilted. "Murder? He's missing. There's no body." "We found him." Mayor Hutchins leaned forward in his saddle, eyes cold. "Bottom of Crow Creek Canyon, skull caved in. And we found something else, too." He held up a bloodied shirt. "This was buried behind your cabin. His blood, Mrs. Cord, hidden by your own hand." "No." The word came out broken. "No, I didn't." But hands were already grabbing her arms, pulling her out into the dirt. She cried out as rough rope wrapped around her wrists, the hemp biting into skin. The baby kicked hard, a protest against the violence. "She's with child!" someone shouted from the crowd gathering in the gray pre-dawn, townspeople, drawn by the commotion. "Devil's child, likely," Pharaoh spat from his horse. "Whole town knows. She's strange. Talks to herself. Reads books. Probably used dark conjuring to trap Samuel into marriage, then killed him when he tried to leave." "That's a lie!" Eliza screamed, struggling against the hands holding her. "Samuel found proof. You're all—" A hand clamped over her mouth. Godfrey's voice in her ear, low and venomous. "Shut your witch mouth, or we'll gag it permanent." They dragged her toward a wagon. Someone had already painted a sign, crude black letters on whitewashed board, "Murderess." They hung it around her neck with wire that bit into her throat. The sun broke over the mesa, flooding everything with merciless light. When they tied her to the post in the town square, only one man stepped forward, a half-breed tracker with a rope-scarred neck and nothing left to lose. They bound her to the whipping post in the center of town, wrists lashed above her head, the sign heavy against her chest. The wire cut into her collarbone. Blood seeped warm beneath her collar. Eliza's legs shook. The baby pressed down hard, a terrible weight. She thought she might faint, but the pain kept her sharp, kept her standing. The crowd gathered like buzzards, women with hard faces, men with harder hearts, children peeking between skirts, eyes wide with the terrible fascination of cruelty. Mayor Hutchins stood on the courthouse steps, reading charges from a paper that crackled in the morning wind. Willful murder of her lawful husband, unnatural acts, suspicion of witchcraft. The word witchcraft rippled through the crowd like a shiver. "Burn her!" someone shouted. "Hang the witch!" Eliza closed her eyes, prayed, not for herself, she was already gone, but for the baby. Please God, not the baby. That's when the horse came through. A big buckskin gelding moving steady through the crowd. People scattered, cursing. The rider sat easy in the saddle, tall, lean, wearing a battered duster the color of dust and old blood. His face was weathered brown, sharp cheekbones, black hair tied back with leather cord, native blood mixed with something else, eyes dark as creek water. He stopped 10 feet from the post. "Cut her down," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. Marshal Godfrey stepped forward, hand on his pistol. "This ain't your business, Macklin." So that was his name. Macklin. Eliza had seen him before, maybe once or twice in town. A tracker, a loner, the kind of man people used when they needed someone found, then forgot about after. "I'm making it my business." Macklin swung down from the saddle, slow and deliberate. Around his neck, barely visible above his collar, were old rope scars, white lines against brown skin. Someone had tried to hang him once. He'd lived. "She killed her husband," Pharaoh snarled from the crowd. "Confessed to it herself." "I never," Eliza started, but her voice broke. Macklin looked at her then, really looked. His eyes went to the sign, the blood on her neck, her swollen belly. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or memory. "You find a body?" he asked, turning back to the marshal. "Down in Crow Creek Canyon. Exactly where we said. Show me." "We don't need to show you nothing." "Then you ain't got a body." Macklin's hand didn't move toward his gun, but the threat was there anyway, coiled in his stillness. "You got a dead man's clothes and a pregnant woman tied to a post. That ain't justice. That's murder, wearing a badge." The crowd shifted, uneasy now. Judge Brennan pushed forward, robes swirling. "This man is a half-breed drifter with no standing in this community. Remove him, Marshal." 2 deputies moved in. Macklin didn't flinch. "I got standing enough. Law says a condemned person gets an advocate if they ask for one. I'm asking on her behalf." "She didn't ask nothing." "I'm asking," Eliza whispered. Her voice was raw, desperate. "Please, I'm asking." Silence fell like a stone. Mayor Hutchins's face went red. "This is irregular." "So's hanging a pregnant woman without trial," Macklin said. He walked to the post, pulled a knife from his belt, a long skinning blade, well used, and cut through the ropes binding Eliza's wrists. She collapsed forward. He caught her, steadied her with surprising gentleness. His hands were calloused, hard but careful. "Can you walk?" he murmured. She nodded, though she wasn't sure. He lifted the wire sign over her head, slow, unwinding it from where it had bitten into her skin. Blood dripped onto the dust. He held the sign for a moment, then dropped it in the dirt and ground it under his boot heel. 3 days, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Give me 3 days. I'll bring you proof of what happened to Samuel Cord. Real proof, not planted shirts and pretty lies." In the canyon where they claimed Samuel died, Macklin found no body, but he found fresh-turned earth and a confession carved into stone. Macklin took her to his camp in the hills, a half-day's ride from town. Eliza barely remembered the journey. She clung to the saddle horn, her body folded around the baby's weight, pain radiating through her hips and spine. Macklin rode behind her, one arm loose around her waist to keep her steady, saying nothing. His camp was sparse, a lean-to of canvas and pine boughs, a fire ring, saddlebags hanging from a tree branch. But it was hidden, tucked into a draw where the creek ran clear and cold, and that was enough. He helped her down, spread a blanket near the fire. "Rest," he said. "I'll be back before dark." "Where?" Her voice cracked. "Crow Creek Canyon, to see what they don't want seen." She grabbed his wrist. Her fingers looked pale against his skin. "They'll kill you." "They'll try." He said it without arrogance, just fact. Then softer. "I know what it's like. Being named something you ain't. Having them put a rope on you for the crime of breathing wrong." His hand went unconsciously to the scars on his neck. "I won't let them do it to you." He left her the canteen, a piece of jerky, and his rifle. Then he was gone, the buckskin picking its way down the slope like smoke. Eliza woke to voices. Not Macklin's, others. She grabbed the rifle, her hands clumsy, and crawled to the edge of the lean-to. Below, in the clearing, 3 horses, 3 men. Pharaoh and 2 she didn't recognize. Hired guns by the look of them, all cold eyes and tied-down holsters. "Trackers camp," Pharaoh was saying. "Find the woman. Finish this quiet." Her breath caught. The baby kicked hard enough to make her gasp. One of the gunmen turned, heard something. They moved toward the lean-to. Eliza raised the rifle. Her arms shook so badly she could barely aim. "Stop!" They stopped. Then Pharaoh smiled. "You gonna shoot us, Mrs. Cord? You even know how to work that thing?" She pulled back the hammer. The click was loud in the mountain silence. "My daddy taught me to shoot before I could read. You take another step, I'll put a hole through you big enough to see daylight." The smile faded. For a long moment, nobody moved. The wind hissed through the pines. A jay screamed somewhere distant. Then hoofbeats. Macklin came up the draw fast, the buckskin scrambling over rock. He took in the scene in a glance. Eliza with the rifle. The 3 men frozen, the tension thick as blood. He dismounted, easy and slow. In his hand was a leather satchel, dusty and stained. "Found something interesting in the canyon," he said. "No body, like I figured, but fresh dirt. Dug down 6 feet and found these." He opened the satchel, pulled out papers. Legal documents, deeds, all signed by Hutchins, Pharaoh, and Brennan. Samuel's proof, the evidence he died for. You buried it with his boots and hat, staged the whole thing. Pharaoh's hand dropped toward his gun. Macklin was faster. His pistol cleared leather like lightning, barrel leveled at Pharaoh's chest. "Don't. You got no authority. I got a U.S. Marshal's warrant from Denver." Macklin reached into his coat, pulled out a folded paper. "Came through last month on another matter. Turns out territorial governor's been investigating land fraud in this county for half a year. Samuel Cord sent him letters. You killed the wrong man, Pharaoh." The land agent's face went ash white. One of the hired guns broke, spurred his horse and ran. The other raised his hands slow. "I ain't dying for this." Macklin kept his gun steady. "Where's Samuel Cord's body?" "The real one?" Pharaoh spat. "Bottom of the mine shaft, old Blackwood pit, weighted down with chains." Eliza made a sound, half sob, half scream. "Who killed him?" Macklin's voice was ice. "Hutchins! Shot him in the back. I just helped bury him." They brought Pharaoh into town at sundown, hands bound, Macklin leading the horse. The whole town turned out. Mayor Hutchins tried to run. Marshal Godfrey shot him in the leg. Judge Brennan locked himself in the courthouse, but the crowd broke the door down. Not for justice, just for the spectacle of powerful men brought low. Eliza stood in the street, still wearing her blood-stained dress, and watched them drag the 3 men toward the jail. A child broke from the crowd, a little girl, maybe 6, and walked up to Eliza. She held out a handful of wildflowers, dusty and wilted. "My mama says you're not a witch," the girl whispered. Eliza took the flowers with shaking hands, pressed them to her chest. An old woman stepped forward next, then another and another. Soft hands on her shoulders, murmured apologies. Someone brought water, someone else, a shawl. The crowd that had screamed for her death now stood silent, ashamed. They pulled Samuel's body from the mine shaft on the day her daughter was born, and Eliza planted the journal where no one could dig it up again. And the baby came 3 weeks later, in Macklin's camp, under a sky thick with stars. No midwife, no doctor, just Macklin, who'd delivered foals and calves, and once, he said, a Cheyenne woman's child during a blizzard. His hands were steady, his voice low and calm, talking her through each wave of pain, until finally, the baby slid into the world with a thin, furious cry. A girl. Dark hair plastered to her skull, fists clenched, lungs strong. Eliza held her and wept. For Samuel, who would never see this. For herself, who had come so close to dying before living. For the sheer impossible fact of survival. "What will you name her?" Macklin asked. He was washing his hands in the creek, giving her privacy, but his voice carried soft through the dawn. Eliza looked down at her daughter's face, red and wrinkled and perfect. "Hope," she whispered. "Her name is Hope." They buried Samuel proper a month later. The territorial marshal came, took statements, arrested the last of the conspirators. The Blackwood Mining Company collapsed under investigation. Land was returned to families who'd been driven off. Samuel's name was cleared, carved onto a headstone of white marble, paid for by the territorial governor himself. Eliza stood at the grave with Hope bundled against her chest, Macklin silent beside her. The whole town had come, some out of genuine sorrow, others out of guilt that would follow them to their own graves. She laid wildflowers on the stone, the same kind the little girl had given her. "He was a good man," the new mayor said, hat in hand. "We failed him. We failed you, Mrs. Cord. There ain't words enough for sorry." Eliza said nothing. Some wounds didn't close just because someone apologized. But she nodded. Once. That was all she could give. She didn't go back to the cabin. Too many ghosts, too much emptiness. Instead, Macklin helped her file a new claim. A piece of land near the creek where his camp had been, where Hope had been born. 20 acres of good soil and clear water, far enough from town to breathe. They built a small house together, just 2 rooms and a porch. Macklin did most of the heavy work, but Eliza insisted on driving nails, sawing boards, making it hers. He stayed in the lean-to nearby, close enough to help, far enough to be respectful. People talked, of course. They always did. A widow and a half-breed tracker, living near each other, unmarried. Scandalous. Eliza didn't care anymore what people said. On the first anniversary of Samuel's death, she took the journal from its hiding place. She'd kept it wrapped in oilcloth, tucked in a wooden box under her bed. Sometimes she read it late at night, tracing Samuel's handwriting with her fingertips, remembering his voice. But it was time. She carried it outside where Macklin was splitting wood. Hope sat in the grass nearby, playing with a wooden doll he'd carved. "Help me with something," Eliza said. They walked to the edge of the property, where she'd been digging a garden plot. The soil was dark and rich, turned over and ready for spring planting. She handed him a shovel. Together, they dug a hole in the center of the garden, 3 feet down. Eliza placed the journal at the bottom, still wrapped in its cloth. On top of it, she laid the wire sign they'd hung around her neck, the one Macklin had torn off and ground into the dirt. She'd kept it. A reminder. "You sure?" Macklin asked quietly. She nodded. "The territorial governor has copies of everything that matters. This..." She touched the journal one last time. "This is Samuel's truth, but it don't need to haunt me anymore. Let it rest. Let him rest." They filled the hole together, covering the past with dark earth. Then Eliza planted an apple seedling directly above it. Macklin steadied the trunk while she packed soil around the roots. Hope toddled over, grabbed a handful of dirt, and threw it with a squeal of delight. "In 10 years, Eliza said, brushing dirt from her hands. "This'll be a tree. It'll give fruit, shade, something living." Macklin looked at her, really looked, the way he had that first day in the town square. "You're stronger than most men I've known." "I'm just alive," she said. "That's all. Just alive." But they both knew it was more than that. A summer came, and the garden grew. Eliza planted tomatoes, squash, beans climbing up poles. The apple seedling put out its first leaves, pale green, fragile, reaching toward the sun. Some evenings, Macklin would sit on the porch and play a mouth harp, while Hope babbled and Eliza rocked in the chair Samuel had made years before. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. People from town still came sometimes, bringing supplies, offering help, trying to make amends. Eliza accepted what was useful and forgave what she could. Some wounds would scar. That was just truth. But the scars could be borne. The rope burns on her wrists faded to thin white lines. The cut on her neck from the wire healed into a small crescent, barely visible. She didn't hide them. They were part of her story now, written on her skin like Samuel's words had been written in ink. One evening, as the sun painted the mesa golden red, Macklin finally asked the question he'd been holding for months. "You ever think about leaving? Starting over somewhere nobody knows what happened?" Eliza looked out at her garden, at the tiny apple tree growing over buried truth, at Hope sleeping against her shoulder. "I already did start over," she said. "Right here, on my own terms." He nodded slowly, smiled, a rare thing, but genuine. "Yeah," he said, "I guess you did." Years later, people would tell the story. About the pregnant woman wrongly accused, the half-breed tracker who saved her, the men who fell, and the truth that rose. They'd argue over details, embellish the violence, soften the cruelty. But they'd always end the same way. If you ride out past Crow Creek, near the hills where the water runs clear, you'll find a small house with a garden. And in that garden, an apple tree. They say it grew from seeds planted in blood and grief, watered with tears and rage. But the fruit it bears is sweet. And the woman who planted it, the one they called murderess, witch, liar, she's still there. Gray in her hair now, daughter grown tall beside her. She'll offer you water if you're thirsty, a place to rest if you're weary, but she won't apologize for surviving. She never does. Subscribe for more untold legends. If this story stirred something in your chest, hit that subscribe button. More raw cinematic folk tales are coming. Wronged women who refuse to break reluctant heroes with scarred hands and loyal hearts. Justice earned in dust and blood. not given by mercy. These aren't fairy tales. They're campfire truths. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story worth remembering. Drop a comment. Which character haunted you most? Eliza, Macklin, or Little Hope? Because legends don't die when we stop telling them. They die when we stop listening. Subscribe now. The next tale is already whispering.